Welcome to the FRCL Weekly Call. We're a group of distribution leads who get together regularly to discuss works in progress, share ideas, and create opportunities for cross-distro collaboration.
All right. Hey, everybody. It is the 5th of August, 2026. We are Fedora, RHEL, CentOS, and Apple leads. Right? No, we don't have Carl. Well, we do have Scott. See, I told you he would show up the minute we started. And today we are here to talk about digital roadmap. And this topic has brought in a different contingent of Red Hatters from the inside that don't have kind of the weekly FRCL context so much. So be gentle. But because we have not rehearsed anything, I want to just do a little bit of setup for why are we having this conversation? Like where did this even come from? And there was this conversation in the Matrix chat several weeks ago, and it went something like this. Hey, the feature workflow in Fedora is sometimes frustrating, but actually it provides really great results. We know exactly what's coming. It's been talked about, it's been voted on, like the technical merits of it have been detailed, the implications, all that. Like to me, as like a process wonk, it is like a crown jewel in Fedora's repertoire. Love it. And I said something like, RHEL doesn't have anything like that. And people went, what? You're kidding me. And like, how do you even know what's going on? We have like these other processes. And one of the things that has struck me, and I know it struck some of you as well, is that over the years, it has not been entirely clear what Red Hat is up to, like what RHEL is up to. And we created CentOS Stream. And so you can see every change as it's rolling out. But it's like, you can see the trees, but you don't necessarily know what the forest is. So we've talked about the feature workflow, and the feature workflow is like, we can talk about like the big picture and like how it decomposes into teams doing things, but we don't necessarily have like a good display of that. And so even if we did, it might not be entirely clear what's going on. And so the conversation for today is how can we, in a way that is very community positive, that is helpful, that everybody comes out ahead, how can we be more transparent and share more of our stuff that is going on that might influence Fedora or might help like recognize what's coming? Not to mention, like, why are these things happening in CentOS Stream? So I think that's like the overall context, at least that's my overall context for this. Scott, as a avid person in this topic area, did you have anything you wanted to add there?
I don't think I can add much to that. I think you did quite well.
All right, then in that case, I would like somebody to raise a hand and ask a question. Like it can be somebody who's new, it can be somebody old, just like, what do you want to know? And that'll kind of start the dialogue going down the hill. Rebecca, thank you. Go for it.
Of course, Brendan. So this is my first time attending one of these meetings, so I'll just briefly introduce myself. I'm Rebecca, and I'm actually also a product manager in the RHEL business unit, also working with Scott McCarty. And in fact, I'm the product manager over the digital roadmap tool. So I'm happy to answer any questions as it relates to any of this, but I know people maybe most likely have questions about the tool itself, but I am also happy to help prompt and guide a little bit. Do people fully understand what the capability is or the features that exist within the digital roadmap? Is there anything surrounding that would be of interest to cover?
I would venture that almost nobody here knows what the digital roadmap tool is. Can you tell us about it?
Absolutely. So within within a RHEL subscription that you're able to get, there is a capability that you're able to opt into for free with a RHEL subscription, and that is Lightspeed, previously known as Insights. And it is used to basically connect your fleet of RHEL systems and look at a bunch of dashboards related to all the possible content or even metrics related to these systems. One of the newest tools within this, I guess, Lightspeed catalog that you can opt in to have your systems connected to is the Lightspeed planning tool. And within this tool is the digital roadmap. But basically what the Lightspeed planning tool is providing is information related to the package lifecycle dates that exist within RHEL for versions 8, 9, and 10. And you're able, when opted in, to cross-reference these package lifecycle dates and how long they are supported in RHEL against your own systems. And that can be incredibly helpful when it comes to proactively planning upgrades related to your systems, or just seeing when particular packages that you have installed are no longer going to be supported. The other feature, which is the, I guess, key title or like thing that has been mentioned, is the digital roadmap piece of this tool. And this is also a list of potential changes for future minor and major versions of RHEL. And these could be additions, enhancements, deprecations. And the caveat is that a lot of this is up to change. It is just most likely what will be coming down the pike for different RHEL minor and major versions. But this can also be cross-referenced and linked to your systems and what is particularly on your systems. And we got some really great feedback from a customer just last week that after some bug fixes related to data accuracy, this is the primary tool that they use to track end of life for package lifecycle support across their RHEL systems. In terms of this being public, I know that it is available on console.redhat.com. As to whether or not you're able from there to access it, I'm not entirely sure, but Scott, feel free to add on, or even Nate as well, if you know this information. And Scott, go for it.
That was probably a good time to bring up something that we've been contemplating, kicking around. Andre, I'm glad you are on because I don't want to speak about this without you here, so I'm glad you are here. We have contemplated, right now you do need a Red Hat account, but we have contemplated adding a feature where we would have a Fedora account, and any Fedora account would be able to access it. So it might be a service that would be available to any Fedora or Red Hat person based on having a Fedora or Red Hat account. I think that would be amazing. I would also think it would be then amazing to add, like, for example, today, you have to basically, what I do to keep track of the Fedora roadmap is I had Matthew Miller help me set up all kinds of jujitsu, like mailing list thingies inside of discussions.fedora project.org, so that basically it emails me every time I see a change request. So I kind of build my own kind of roadmap in my email. It would be very cool to just see the entire roadmap like in a single tool. You know, whether you had a Fedora or a Red Hat account, you could just kind of see what's coming from Fedora to CentOS to RHEL. Like, to me, that would be amazing. I remember we discussed this at Summit 2 summits ago, which I'm embarrassed to say. I know things take longer than we want them to, but I remember Davide and I discussed this deeply, and everyone seemed pretty excited about it, but we haven't quite gotten there yet. So, but anyway, that's my thought.
All right, Pat, then Neil.
So you mentioned package end of life dates. Are packages going end of life before the end of RHEL? I thought that was a modularity only thing. Or am I misunderstanding?
Yeah, like with the app streams, basically, Pat, whether they were modularity or named RPMs, it kind of doesn't matter the technology. It was really about, there's like, for example, Python 3.14. I know this one off the top of my head because I'm the Hummingbird guy now. Python 3.14 was added to RHEL 10, call it 6 months after, I don't exactly remember, but after launch of RHEL 10. And then it will go away after 3 years. So like the package gets added after the RHEL 10.0 release. And, you know, basically any app stream can be added at any dot release boundary and then removed. And so, yeah, there are package end of life, basically end of lives for things like Python or MariaDB or, you know, those kinds of things. All the things that are in the app stream channel in particular have a lot of that. And the extension channel could have that theoretically.
Surprise. Yeah, having a tool like this to actually show you like what are your liabilities and where are you in your life cycle for your system install seems kind of valuable.
And Rebecca, you might want to demo that like that screen that shows the app streams. That might actually be really cool here too.
Let's field Neil's question. I have a follow-up, and then Rebecca, if you want to demo, that would be fabulous. Go ahead, Neil.
Yeah, so you briefly mentioned like being able to wire up fast to be able to log into the digital roadmap stuff. I think this is also something we've kind of poked at the edge of RFEs and whatever in the Quay Jira or whatever, like way back. But like as Fedora has, for reasons that are still slightly unclear to me, but we've started moving OCI archives to be hosted on Quay.io. The requirement to have a Red Hat account for that is coming, and I don't think that's super great for us, and it would be great if Fedora accounts could be qualified for that sort of thing too, because like Quay.io is also a community resource, and if we have a pathway to encouraging people who are Fedora contributors to publish whatever work that they're working on through Quay.io, I mean, that's just nice for everybody involved and makes things a lot less thorny.
Go ahead, Scott.
I was just going to respond. I agree with you, Neil, and I would be totally supportive of that. We are not the right people, though. I don't think any of us are the right people. But the good news is, since I've been talking to those people, because I am in the Hummingbird team now, I can connect you all with, or maybe we could have them come on the FRCL call and talk about that, because I know that team has typically been very resource constrained, but I don't know why they would be against that. Like off the top of my head, I don't have any knowledge that they would be. They might be supportive of that. I would be supportive of that.
I suspect it's just more of a prioritization thing internally within Red Hat, as opposed to this is something we don't want to do. Because I know this has come up a couple of times when we started moving registry FPO to be backed by Quay. So it's just more of a, like, if we start having Fedora account integration into the Red Hat digital footprint, then I think it starts becoming easier to have those conversations for other venues as well. So
yeah, and
like,
I would be supportive of it. I would be supportive of it in particular because Fedora Hummingbird, I would like, you can already build images in Image Builder, and it would be amazing to basically use your FAS account, build a Fedora Hummingbird image, and then be able to push it into Quay right there and all have it just from your FAS account. To me, that would be amazing. So I would definitely advocate for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was more thinking along the lines of like Fedora SIGs that are producing developer content or toolboxes or things like that that are specific to their teams and usage. Having a way to have their footprint connected universally through the Fedora account system is something we've tried really hard to enable. And the move to Quay is like a link in where this is broken now. But if we start having Fedora account integration in other parts of the Red Hat digital footprint, I assume it will become an easier question for things like that because the infrastructure is the same across the board.
So I think everybody with a FAS account would love to have that give them access to the Red Hat subscriber area. And considering we have all of these like free programs for just random individuals on the internet where all you need is an email address, I feel like if there's
that would be fantastic. I would love it if my FAS just gave me the RHEL developer sub. So because for Apple people, this is a royal pain in the butt. And so like, this would be very, very nice for everyone involved.
That seems like an idea worth exploring. Not what we're here for today necessarily, but I think that's an idea worth exploring. So we'll follow up on that one.
I just wanted to bring it up before I forgot it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like I'm seeing eye to eye with you, Neil. Scott's blowing trumpets with emojis. It's lots of win here. Okay, so Rebecca, when you did the initial verbal expression of what digital roadmap is, you outlined lifecycle stuff and also what are the technical changes that are coming up stuff. And if you can give us a little tutorial of this thing, I think that'd be really interesting for people.
Absolutely. So luckily enough, I have the pages pulled up right now and I can share my screen. So the first thing I will share is the lifecycle page. So this is located in the hybrid cloud console, and it's like one of the Lightspeed tools, and it's underneath the planning right here. And this is an example of what the dashboard looks like for lifecycle. So in this case, this is for RHEL 9 application streams. It is sorted by their retirement date, And from here, you can see the exact date with this line here of like where we are in time versus the, I guess, life cycle of some of the packages that exist as RHEL 9 application streams. And you might be worried, oh, because this is in red, does that mean there's like a problem? No, it just means it is no longer being actively supported. As for the yellow bars, it just means that it's fairly close. And then green just lets you know that it is still actively supported for quite some time. And this also exists for RHEL 10, RHEL 8, and then I think just in general, you can see this for literally everything. And you can also sort by like installed only versus every single package as well. And there's also a list at the bottom of like the retirement dates for the different RHEL versions. And so this is what this first page looks like. And yeah, you can actually even export this data as well. That's another really amazing capability. And now I also would love to show the digital roadmap page as well, unless if people have questions on what we're looking at right now.
Rebecca, can I add one 5-second note? Because I think a lot of people here might not be familiar. So the installed only, if you have say 100 RHEL servers, you can register them all against Red Hat when you do your RHC command, and you can basically register them. And if they're registered, you can basically see your entire fleet. So you can see like what's installed on your fleet that's registered, or you can just look at all the data in general. So like I don't have very many servers registered. I have like 1 or 2. So I typically just hit all and just look at like, hey, what's coming in all of RHEL, right? Like as opposed to like my fleet, because I don't really use fleet stuff that much. But for customers, they like that, if they can register their fleet.
And one other thing I'll say was touched on very briefly, and I forgot to mention this, and like the verbal introduction I gave. I think one of the primary drivers for why this tool was created is because it became quite confusing to keep track of application streams and the different pieces that were supported in those app streams. So that's kind of another reason why having this visualization for those who are on RHEL 8 through 10, having something like this can be quite useful. But yeah, I'm also happy to show the digital roadmap page. That's the second tab that is part of the planning tool. So it's lifecycle and roadmap. And this is just a list of different upcoming, and when I say upcoming, it is also can be directly tied to the RHEL systems that you have installed and the particular version that they are attached to, RHEL 8 through 10. And it's a lot of these features are, they are created and like they're created by RHEL business unit product managers, those who are in charge of or who I guess have influence over what these feature roadmaps look like for the different tools within RHEL. And I think it's like one of the biggest, drivers here, differentiators as to why this is really useful is because for the most part, I think historically, customers learn about what is coming down the pike for RHEL during roadmap presentations. Like that is when they learn about it. But the digital roadmap page allows for learning about some of the upcoming features to be known at a much earlier time and also on your own terms. And so it's allowing you or enabling you to also be more proactive. But yeah, for example, like this is a feature that is an addition that's targeting 10.4. And yeah, there's a drop-down menu and you can read a little bit more about what this change is. There are also certain ones, digital roadmap items that are tied to particular packages or infrastructures, and that can also be filtered. But yeah, let's see. Yeah, there's about 63 total digital roadmap items and some targeting 10.4, 10.3, but even like those targeting 9 as well, different 9 minor versions. Yeah, those are the 2 main pages of the digital roadmap. I'm also happy to answer any questions on the roadmap page. Yeah, and Scott, feel free to add anything.
And if you don't mind, I will demo a hair more, if you don't mind, Rebecca.
Go for it.
I will. Yeah, let me show my screen real quick. I will show my entire screen, and then hold on. I want to show you all that this data is also available. Can you guys see this? Am I showing my screen right? No, I'm not.
Yes, you are.
Go
We
to
can
the
see
text
it.
window.
Show my screen anyway. Oh, okay, I'm doing that thing where I kill you guys with the Inception screen. Do you see it now?
Yes.
We see it.
Okay. Okay, cool. So I use Claude Code a lot all day, and that data, that same data that Rebecca just showed in the beautiful web interface, is also available through the RHEL MCP server. And so, for example, you see here quickly, I typed, where did I type it? I said, show me the RHEL roadmap. I literally just told Claude, hey, show me the RHEL roadmap. It was smart enough to list my MCP servers, and then it basically went, oh, here's when the 10.2 GA date was, here's when the full support ends, blah, blah, blah. And it breaks down all the data. It tells me when these are coming, RHEL 11, blah, blah, blah. It starts to tell me, like, here's what 10.197 looked like, here's what 10.298 looked like, here's what 10.399 looked like. It tells me that May 2027 will be this, and here's some things that are coming on the roadmap. And then it shows me, like, oh, look, modularity is removed in RHEL 11. One could easily imagine that when you start to think of it as the dynamic set of data, it would be so cool for it to show me, like, what's coming in Fedora and RHEL and CentOS as well, right? Like, it would be cool to be like, here's what's coming in Fedora, here's what's moving into CentOS, and then here's all those RHEL things that are coming. Like, it would be amazing to show that. So I don't know. That's I just want to highlight what made my brain start thinking about that, right? Like you know, the next natural hunger is to ask, well, what's coming in Fedora, right? And I've validated that with customers. They've told me even that it would be fine, even if you say you're going to bring something and then you decide last minute you're not. That's fine, because it still would give us your thinking on why you're moving from DNF 4 to 5, or why you're moving from XYZ to blah, 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 or why you went from, you know, send mail to Postgres or whatever. You know, like, I'm thinking of things in your, you know, I'm dating myself, but I'm trying to think of when you moved to system D from init script. No, could I be more provocative? Could I find something more provocative that we like brought forward? But they said it would be useful to see that anyway. That is what I've definitely gotten feedback from a bunch of customers. So
The tragedy that we are experiencing here and now is that we do not have very many people from FESCO or the Fedora Council on. And what if they were here? Maybe they're going to watch the recording or read the summary. FESCO, look at this. You can actually have like a display of all those change requests in one place. Neil, I'm so glad you were here. Go ahead.
I mean, for Fedora, we already have the overview pages for every Fedora release, the changes that have been approved and are being developed. We have change set pages in the Fedora wiki that are basically generated every time changes are approved. And these have been going on actually all the way back to when the features process started way, way back in, like, I think, what, Fedora 7? So every Fedora feature list and every change set has been tracked and composited into an overview page from nearly the beginning. So we do have those things. I mean, it's not like a fancy web service thingy with API JSONs and MCPs and whatevers, but it is there, and you can look at it in a reasonable overview type fashion.
It's not yet, but it could be. Sorry, Scott, go ahead.
No, I was going to ask Neil. This is pretty meaty here. I did not know those existed. If they do, I may ping you offline to find those, because I could easily build an MCP server that would learn how to fleece those and just provide it directly as a short-term, you know, hack, basically, to just be able to see that today. But longer term, it would be amazing to have it built into the digital roadmap. Rebecca, yes, please, thank you for raising your hand next. I was like, it would be amazing if we could hack that and figure that and just pull that data and, you know, like, make it into a service.
Every feature and every change for every Fedora release also has a wiki categorization tag of change XX accepted or whatever. So, like, you can also just work through those programmatically and systematically and identify every change for every Fedora release that has ever been accepted and included in a release.
Are they around before the release, or is it only after the release drops? Can you see, like, things that are in progress, or is that only in the discussions?
As soon as they are accepted by FESCO, the tags are updated. And so they go in there. The progress is actually encoded in the wiki page itself. So you can just, like, read it because it's structured text. I mean, it's no worse than what you already do with skills and whatever with agentic workflows, because it's just structured text and they're all formulaic enough that you can just teach it how to read them.
Go ahead, Rebecca.
Thank you. I also would be interested in seeing what this data source looks like to see if it could be something that is just exists on our feature roadmap, like to eventually implement for this tool. What I did raise my hand for, though, is there is a brand new feature that is a part of the Lightspeed planning tool or the digital roadmap tool. And Brendan, if you're also going to address what's being discussed, I can just go afterwards because it's a little bit of a pivot.
All right. I'm going to just share a quick story. So a long time ago, Red Hat produced Red Hat Enterprise Linux 7, and then time went by, and then more time went by, and then we started RHEL 8, and then we were like, yeah, let's pause for a little bit. Let's like figure out some org stuff. And then 5 years later, we released RHEL 8. That was a lot of change to digest. Like we went through 10 Fedora releases between 7 and 8. It was a substantial amount of material to process, a lot of change to process. Things like syslog went away. Like it was a lot, right? So one of the things we did was go through every single one of Fedora's change proposals and assess them. Like, is this a thing that we want to include? Do we need to back this out? Do we need to document this? Do we need to do training on this? Like, how does this affect our customers? Like, what is the upgrade path? So that was incredibly useful. And it was as tedious and awful to do as it was useful. And so one of the things I always try to do is whenever we find something that's very valuable that's also painful, like looking for ways to do that thing in the future without the pain is I think just like what we owe our fellow human beings, right? And if we had some way of feeding these things forward and backward between Fedora and RHEL through CentOS, I think that would be incredibly valuable. Like the raw data is there. I mean, it's in a wiki, but it's there. On the RHEL side, the structured data is there, and we've got like some access control problems. But I think both of these things could be improved. I think we could take some fairly minor steps and have some major benefit if we did something to line them up. Like Rebecca, when you were showing the digital roadmap, I saw the link to a RHEL BU ticket. People might be able to see that number, but if they aren't a Red Hatter, they can't see the content, right? So there's just like one step further we need to go to realize a lot more value. All right, I'm going to get off my soapbox now. Go ahead.
Yeah, I guess there is one, it is a bit of a pivot, but it's pretty brand new. It's our newest feature for the digital roadmap that's just been implemented. And I'm sharing this information even before the like public blog is released related to this feature. But most recently, our engineering team has been able to implement an email reporting capability. And I will also just show what that screen looks like on the hybrid cloud console. But basically, customers have the ability to opt in to monthly reports on both the lifecycle page of the planning tool and also the roadmap page. And this is just a monthly roll-up report of all of the potential changes that are coming down the line. And so it's something else that is even more helpful. You don't even necessarily need to go to this dashboard anymore. Kind of like what Scott demoed, you can just use an MCP tool set, or you could even just wait to be pinged via email on both of these for both of these pages. And this is I wanted to also share what the email reporting page could look like. And so let me try also switching real quick. But yeah, it should look like this in an email that you receive if you choose to opt in, at least for like the lifecycle page. And yeah, this has been this is implemented already. It's available to use. So that's also something else I wanted to add related to this tool.
Nice. Thanks for sharing. Okay, so do we have more questions or comments from anybody here on this topic? Andre, go ahead.
So hello, I'm Andre. I'm managing the image builder team, and one thing that got me interested is, or that got into my mind when I was thinking about it, is that many Red Hat teams are actually working like on the whole stack, right? Like from Fedora to RHEL, and it would be amazing if for some features are on the rigid roadmap that there would be also status of these features as is currently in CentOS Stream or Fedora, because for example, a new GCC version, I don't know what is it currently, like it is already probably in Fedora, it might be already in CentOS Stream, I don't know, and it's targeting 10.4. That would be amazing, because like we in the image builder team, we are trying to push everything all the time to Fedora and CentOS Stream, and it would be nice if we can actually get some traction from the community and even from our paying customers, so they can try this feature before it actually goes into RHEL, and give us feedback to shape this to shape these features. So I would really like to see it. And yeah, I will need to talk to my product manager, because we are missing some items from the digital from our roadmap and the digital roadmap. So thank you for sharing this with us.
All right. So, Pat, Amy, we've mostly been talking about Fedora, RHEL. Do you have any questions or suggestions or like any inspiration here that we should be talking to once? If you're talking, you might be on mute. But Scott's covering for you. Go ahead, Scott.
Oh, no. If somebody else was going to talk, I'll wait.
There's Amy.
Sorry, I'm in my mobile office. I just want to make sure that we do include stream. And I did put this in the chat. Yes, I know FAST is the same login for CentOS. But if we're going to put in dashboards that show the Fedora process, I think it's also important, as already just mentioned, to show when things are coming out of CentOS Stream so people can prepare. And it also goes back to the total feedback loop. If something goes in a Fedora and CentOS and everyone's like, hell no, this is not going to work for us, that's important information to get back to RHEL. So the earlier things can get in, the better.
Scott is clapping.
I would add to that, I love that digital roadmap for the RHEL things, but since it all happens in CentOS Stream first, that should be available in CentOS Stream at least contemporaneously, if not prior to. Because if it's happening in CentOS Stream, we ought to document it. And if you have the data, it's just a matter of finding a way to publish it.
So while we're solutioning, just one of the things that really strikes me is that the graph basically has just each line is like a start and an end. It would be awesome if there's like a little color differentiation for it's in CentOS Stream right here. A little slice of that, a little preview bit. Scott, go ahead.
I am going to commit to doing some Claude Code hackery and seeing if I could build something, because I have a suspicion I could fleece the CentOS repo, fleece the Fedora data that Neil mentioned, and basically make probably also steal the look and feel of the current digital roadmap, and just because it is open source, it's pattern fly. I could probably take a stab at a dream, call it a vibe coded dream of what this might look like. I think it would be cool to at least do that, and then like get everybody to throw darts at it and try to, because we've got to do this in a community way where there's something we can look at. And then Rebecca, we could file issues with you to like implement it into the service, right? And like probably be better to hand off to your team, like, hey, here's like a working thing that kind of looks right, like. By the way, make it real, make it better than Scott McCarty's, vibe coded nonsense.
We love your vibe coded nonsense. Right, people in chat are agreeing with that. All right, so Anybody else? Questions? Tangents? Related stories?
I gotcha.
Yeah. Was that a yes, Amy? Right.
Did I forget to
will.
turn off my mic?
You did.
All right.
Sorry. Okay, Scott, I have one other thing. So extensions, you mentioned, and we, like, I know this is still like a growth area, and I'm wondering, like, do you think, or are we already showing kind of extensions plans in the digital roadmap that we're showing? Or is that a future thing, or not on the roadmap at all?
Was that question for me, Brendan?
I saw Rebecca shake her head a little, so I think it might be a Rebecca question, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, great question. I'm fairly certain currently there is not information related to extensions that exists within this tool. Everything, like in full transparency, everything so far is very much so RHEL contained. Like it's RHEL view features that are like pulled into the digital roadmap and specifically like targeting different RHEL like exact features. But that is also something like especially as it relates to this conversation, that may be important as we discuss and like brainstorm expanding what exactly shows up in this tool. But yeah, does that answer your question?
I think so. I think I might also be trying to just prod Carl a little bit, because I know that EPEL is such an important thing for many RHEL users, and extensions is kind of our initial foray in how to provide the value of at least a fraction of the value of EPEL to RHEL customers. Like anything we could do to add visibility there, I think it might be useful. Like we have this full continuum of development and compatibility and sharing. If we can have the information we relate to end users reflect their actual use cases, that feels right to me. That even goes all the way down into like Lightwell and what's happening with the rest of the stack. So okay, so anyway, that's perhaps a step too far for today. Anyhow, so anybody, anything else for this topic?
At the end of this call, I'm happy to share like a very broad overview deck kind of going through the digital roadmap, if that would be helpful for people as like a resource.
Yeah, we have, for each one of these calls, we have a Jira epic. So anything that people provide, I'll make sure it's linked in the epic. And that epic is publicly available. So anyone who logs in, I think you can even see it without logging in to Jira can get the content.
Awesome, thank you.
All right. Oh, thanks for coming. Becca, Andres, Scott, Brad, and everyone else. But last call. Okay, let's wrap it up here. And it sounds like internally we have a few follow-ups to do, but they sound promising. So I will talk to y'all later. Thanks for joining.